Oppenheimer 2023, part 2 of Barbenheimer. It amuses me how these two films have become intertwined. So very different films. In my office at the end of week discussion on films, which happens every so often, it seemed that much of the team that were in were Team Barbie. Team Oppie just happened to be working at home, I guess. I must say, I loved both films. This one is significantly longer. I often find 3-hour films tough, but there was a lot of detail to keep my attention. The film is about Robert J. Oppenheimer. He was a scientist who got recruited to Project Y. It was about developing the atom bomb. Robert Oppenheimer is played by Cillian Murphy. I've seen him in so many films. He's been wonderful in everything from Anthropoid. Oh my gosh, that is a really heavy film. One of the most difficult Second World War films. I shall have to review that. In Time, 2011. Breakfast on Pluto. Sunshine, 2007. Red Eye, The Wind That Shakes the Barley. Cillian Murphy's, whenever I see him on screen, I know he's going to be excellent. There's Emily Blunt, who plays Kitty, his wife. Matt Damon, who plays Leslie Groves. I didn't recognise Robert Downey Jr. He plays Louis Strauss. I found this quite bizarre. He gets some cyanide, potassium cyanide, and he injects it into an apple. I've been reading about cyanide, the English cherry laurel, a tree that's found in gardens. I've been reading about the poison garden, Northumbria, and one of the most deadly trees that you can find in Britain is the cherry laurel, the English laurel. And it's got these oily green leaves. Might seem innocuous, but they contain cyanide that kill you really quickly. It's super toxic. Anyway, he injects it into this apple, leaves it on a lecturer's desk, and then in a scene shortly afterwards, he rushes back and picks up the apple and throws it into the bin before the lecturer eats it. Wow, to actually consider doing something like that just boggled my mind. This story is centred on a hearing in 1954, a few years, 9 years after the Second World War has finished. And the reason he's in this security hearing is because there are people, quite a few witnesses, they argue that he isn't trusted to be involved in high-level security in the US government. And that's despite all his work in the Second World War for the USA in developing Project Manhattan to build the atom bomb. Wow, it's spectacular seeing it on the large screen. Some films really are worth seeing in the cinema and not on a laptop or a small or any size television. Even if you've got a television the size of your living room wall, it's not the same as a cinema. You can spend thousands on surround sound, but it won't be as good quality as the surround sound in the cinema. And it's really booming. One of the key things in this film is the test of the first A-bomb. There's this area called Los Alamos in New Mexico. It's 40 miles to the nearest human settlement. It's so remote, so deserted. It's an ideal place. And they talk about the Native Americans who use it as a burial site, and a few people I think who come and camp, but they secure this huge area, this meso area, and it's because they're conducting a secret experiment that they don't want anyone else to know about. Even before the internet, things would leak. Loose lips sink ships. There were spies. The whole thing about this security hearing was the argument that Robert Oppenheimer was not to be trusted. One of the arguments is that situations develop over time as the Cold War started rumbling on, and given the 50s was the era of McCarthyism and suspicion about what they called the commies, any sign of communism, any sign of socialism, I imagine, any sign of particularly left-wing politics, the whole level of paranoia about security means that if you've had any sympathy for another country, you're probably not to be trusted. That's the impression I got. I felt a little depressed by the hearing. You can put in a lot of good work in your career, and yet a few few years later, it's dismissed. No, I don't think we could trust most of the people. That's what one character says. Now, the stakes are much higher. We've got a Cold War. There's that element, this security hearing, a lot of that element. It is like a courtroom drama. It's not a court, but it feels like that. Then there's the elements about the actual building of this small town, Los Alamos. There's quite a bit about Robert Oppenheimer's love interest. There's Emily Blunt, and there's the Tatler affair. There's certain elements that are raked over. We get to see a lot of it in flashback. How Oppenheimer got the gig in the first place, how he was moving into an area of science that had not yet been explored. And this is where it's really powerful, the whole chain reaction, the really scary stuff, when he's explaining how the risk of splitting the atom, the chain reaction just wouldn't stop. It would destroy humanity, destroy everything we know, devour the whole of planet Earth. He's a theorist, so he argues it's near zero, and that's the best it will get. Whilst the colleague he's talking to says zero would be preferable. Oppenheimer, being a theorist, he looked into black holes. He got involved in the theory that they actually existed. There's a lot about space. So much reminds me of when I was growing up, the 70s and 80s. I read a lot of Peter Ustinov, Arthur C. Clarke. I was just amazed by science fiction. Some of it goes over my head. I find it still interesting. AI, Ex Machina, those kind of films. I suppose I'm not so keen on the fact that so much of it is dystopian. It's so bleak. It feels bleak in real life, the threats that AI may pose to our lives. What I like in film is escapism. That's perhaps why I so liked Barbie. I mean, there's the real world Barbie land dynamic there, but in Oppenheimer, what I loved was the historical aspects, being put into the position of being someone, not knowing if the invention, the discoveries you make could lead to the end of humanity. I mean, that is mind-blowing, and it takes a lot of courage to set up the type of situation which they believed was the only way. They would be handing it over to the government and they would be calling the shots about whether to use it. The scientists knew this cutting-edge stuff might lead to the ultimate catastrophe. There's a lot about the conscience of Oppenheimer, how he felt. One part of him was horrified by what he'd been involved with, what he'd created. One of the most powerful scenes involves addressing an audience and they're giving him a rapturous applause because the crowd, my friend thought there was more women than men. I think it was largely gender balanced back at the trailer. But they are hero worshipping him and he's visualizing their destruction. Very powerful imagery. Reminds me a bit of Terminator, where a nuclear bomb goes off in 1997. So very glad it was still in 2023. So ultimately, I thought it was an awesome film. There was so much to think about. The political dynamic. One prominent person who he meets as he walks out, he describes Oppenheimer as a crybaby simply because he's got a conscience. It shows the nature of politics. The type of people who become politicians are often ruthless. I suppose we specialise in life and some people get to the top simply because they are able to deal with situations like the existential crisis, the nature of fighting for your country's life. There's the dynamic of winning elections, having the charisma to be able to talk up what needs doing to save your country. But the nature of politics, often that type of politics becomes extremely toxic for people. The whole nature of patriotism compared to the idea of being a world citizen and caring about the whole of humanity, regardless of where you come from. Politicians made decisions such as to drop the atom bomb and kill tens of thousands of people, 70,000 in Hiroshima, 120,000 total. Hiroshima and Nagasaki, to cause that much destruction to civilian life is unthinkable for most of us. And yet, a group of politicians decided that's what needed to be done to end the war. And I very much sympathise with Oppenheimer, in a way, he wasn't as anti-war, he wasn't as pro-pacifism, he didn't demonstrate his compassion that strongly, and yet that's the kind of takeaway that I left the cinema with. I was thinking, I'd not like to be a world leader. I wouldn't like to be involved in such big decisions about taking actions that will involve the deaths of other people. When its fears over Nazi Germany, and then after Germany surrendered in May 1945, the plan to drop the bomb on Japanese cities. Some of the scientists were shocked by that. I also think there's a parallel with the way Alan Turing was treated, having seen The Imitation Game 2014, the way he was lambasted afterwards and he was pulled out for being gay. Really shocking from this perspective of the 2020s, and yet in some ways not so shocking, because there's still that anti-LGBT rhetoric out there, and it's horrifying. This particular thing didn't come in the film LGBT, but the left-right political machinations came up. I've scored it 9 out of 10. No surprise there. So much in the film. Thanks for watching. Let me know your thoughts. Please like, please subscribe. Bye for now. As a postscript, I thought I'd mention that I've now been publishing these YouTube film reviews for a year. It was the 7th of August 2022 when I uploaded my first public film review, and here I am a year later, load of films done. I'll talk about it more in my next blog, but if you've subscribed during the last year, thank you very much. Really appreciate it. I'd love to know any feedback, anything, especially constructive criticism that will help me improve this channel. I really appreciate the fact that you've watched any of my film reviews. I hope to see you for the next one. Thanks. Bye for now.